Raising Us is sponsored by Nugget, the makers of the original Play Couch. Parenting doesn't come with a script, but it does come with lots of questions. I'm Elise Hugh, journalist, mom, and your host for Raising Us, a podcast from A Kids Co. Today, we're jumping into a big, sometimes tough conversation about racism. We hear about racism all the time in our neighborhoods, on the news, and on social media. But what does it actually look like to talk about race with our families, especially with kids? How do we help everyone understand each other instead of shutting down or getting scared? To help us explore this, we're joined by two incredible guests who use storytelling and humor to tackle these tough issues. Later in the episode, we'll hear from Jelani Memory, the founder of A Kids Co. and author of A Kid's Book About Racism. First up, we'll hear from Kamau Bell, a comedian and Emmy Award-winning host of CNN's United Shades of America. He's spent years exploring race and social justice through powerful and often funny conversations. Kamau begins by reflecting on his own experiences with race and how they have shaped his work. Kamau Bell, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, you have shared a lot about how your own experiences with race and identity have really shaped you coming up in and your view of the world. What was a moment when you really noticed racism in your own life?
In my own life? So whenever I think about the first moment that I noticed racism, I was 15 when I noticed it as a thing that was in my life, even though it had been there before. But as far as directly impacting me, I was 15. Me and my best friend, who was a Jewish guy named Rob, were in Rose Records in downtown Chicago. And Rose Records is one of those old school record stores with
Yeah.
multiple floors.
Yeah.
And so I was on the third floor. He was on the first floor. This was pre cell phones, all you young people. Somehow we had miscommunicated. So I was waiting for him on the third floor. He's waiting for me on the first floor. Finally, I was like, it's been too long. I'm going to go downstairs. As I walked out the third floor, store security guard said, "Hey, man, I need to search you. You stole something." And I had not stolen anything. But in that moment, I was 15 and didn't know, like, "Ah, this must be a mistake." And I think he said, "I need to search you." And I said something like, "I know my rights," which I didn't know them well enough to stop him from searching me. But he did search me. I remember he found my inhaler. And he said, and I remember he said, "Do you have asthma?" And I was like, "What a weird, yeah, yes." But and then he took me literally like by the back of my coat, walked me downstairs, and like tossed me out into the street and said, "Don't come back." And I had to
Wow.
stand outside the record store and like wave Rob down and his brother to say, even though now I would have just gone back in. Like I would have just I wouldn't have just waited for the moment to, but then I waved Rob down and his brother and waved them outside and told them what happened. And that was the first time I realized, oh yeah, okay, this racism thing is, because I immediately knew it as racism. There was no
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah, and it leads to different outcomes for different people.
Mhm.
What about what was happening up until 15? Did you feel like the conversations around race in your family or in your communities were limited or just, like, not happening?
No, no, no. We were having all the conversations. I think the thing that was the problem wasn't the conversations in my house, it was conversations outside of my house. Because I always feel like people think of Obama as being America's like first time we were lied to about post-racial. I think
Mm,
America goes through that generationally about no more racism because of this.
and color
So
blindness and right.
yeah. So I grew up in the colorblind generation. I grew up in the racism generation, the post-King generation of like somehow the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. meant there was no more racism. It's a very funny thing that America does. But so that somehow black people believed, not all, but that we could achieve our way out of racism because we had been sold that lie.
Yeah.
And so I was in that first generation of like racism was a thing that happened in the past and it was bad and you should learn about it. And believe me, my mom made sure I saw Roots when I was a kid. I watched every documentary about black people. I went to her to listen to Alice Walker speak. And so I was very aware of racism, but it was a thing that was like, this is a thing they did when televisions were all black and white.
Oh, okay.
And then when that happened, and I remember when I told my mom what happened, she was surprised that it hadn't happened before. She's like, I just would have assumed that kind of thing would have been happening. And so it wasn't, this was no fault of anybody's other than the dominant culture for convincing me that racism was a thing in the past. But in my mom's house, we had black art on the walls, we had African art, we had books, black books. So I was aware that racism was something I needed to know about. And it wasn't even my choice. It was just, this is the kind of house we grew up in.
Yeah, yeah. Draw the link between your own experiences, your own learnings about race and identity to now your work and your art and what you create.
I mean, the way I describe it is that I feel like America's race and racism. I was it, was it the problem? The challenge that America presents around the issues of race and racism and the damage it does around those issues is kind of my family business. It's like, so my mom worked in the family business. She was a textbook editor for English textbooks. She edited and published her own self-published her own books of black quotations as a way when I was a teenager. It's how she put food on the table. My dad was always the guy who worked in the company who ended up like diversifying the company, whether that was his job or not. Like and then he got titles of like chief diversity officer. But so my family has always been in the position of like, how do we make it better for the next generation of black folks, which was what they were taught by their parents, which is what they were taught by their parents. So it's like, it's not like their generation was different. It's just they did it differently. And, so the way I say it is like, I just want to be a comedian, but the family business is is overcoming race and racism. So eventually I had to take over the hardware store, even though if you'd asked me when I started doing comedy, what did I want to be? I would have said Eddie Murphy. Like I would have been like, and not that Eddie Murphy's not in his way overcoming race and racism, but he's got some great bits about it, but it's not as we're doing it in different ways. It's not basically I'm not as talented as Eddie Murphy. That's all I'm trying to say.
Now that there's just less dog whistling then, I guess, about racism, how do you keep going in this moment? Like, what's kind of keeping you going in this sort of anti-woke era that we're in?
My New Year's resolution, which is the most successful one I've ever had, was to be more petty. So I think there was I think, and Michelle Obama, who at one point said, "When they go low, we go high,"
Right.
and then eventually she was like, "They went too low." Like so she's like, "When they go low, I don't go to the inauguration."
Mhm.
So I think for me, it was like a sign of like we have to stop pretend. We have to start pretending like a stiff upper lip will get us through this. And there are multiple ways to attack this problem, and one way is by making sure that rhetorically, comedically, social medially, I sort of say everything I want to say when I want to say it to the full extent of how I want to say it, even if doing that is probably going to lose me capitalism opportunities.
Okay.
and,
You're willing
and
to
I say that
sacrifice it. Yeah.
I'm willing to. I'm gonna figure out how to feed my kids every day and take care of my mom, my 88-year-old mom who's still with us, and my wife and all that stuff. But I'm also not gonna be cowed by I better not say anything because then as I joke about in my stand-up act, whenever I start to get like, this is too much, I should probably pull back. The ghost of Harriet Tubman shows up and goes, I'm sorry, what's too much? It's too much to be a comedian who's saying mean things about the president. Like, so I don't really think that I try to keep it in perspective. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean that I haven't like literally lost opportunities because of my unwillingness to sort of like get along or just sort of like be less fervent. But I feel like when it's all said and done, when it's all said and done, if my legacy is like he made a lot of money or he made a lot of good points, I think prefer he made a lot of good points.
Comedy can be such a balm too. It can help when people laugh about these difficult topics. How important is it to be talking about your personal experiences, talking about mine, talking about just race in general and racism, in order for kids to understand what's happening around us better?
Right now, it is probably some of the most revolutionary work you can do is to have open and frank discussions about race and racism as many different places as possible, and especially with your children. And not just with your children of color or your black children or your indigenous children, but with your children, full stop. One of the big problems that I recently had with fitness influencer Jillian Michaels talking about what she thought should be in the National African American History and Culture Museum is that she is the adopted mother. She is a mother of an adopted black child.
Mm,
So if that's how you're talking about race and racism on television, what are you doing to that child in your home?
mm.
Because your black child is having very specific experiences. that have nothing to do with your experience. And I know that because I'm the father of three girls. So on that level, they're having experiences I can't like totally relate to because I'm not a girl. And on the second level, even though they are all black, they're all mixed kids. So that even their mixedness means they're having different experiences I'm having. So if you're not ever saying to your child, tell me whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, and I'm just going to sit here and listen. If you're always telling your kid, no, no, let me tell you what to think, or let me tell you what you're thinking, even let me tell you why you're confused about what happened to you, then that is the, that is that to me, that's you might as well be feeding them Twinkies every day at every meal.
When you are listening to kids and listening to younger audiences that you reach, what kinds of questions are they asking you?
I think the thing that when I have had younger audiences, the thing they appreciate is I don't do much talking. I do way more listening than talking. So the thing that they appreciate is that I will ask open-ended questions and then I will affirm what I heard and repeat it back to them. Is that what you're saying? And that I will express empathy and support for them in a way that doesn't feel like I'm an adult who's like, really? Or an adult who's like, let me tell you let me tell you what you think. So I'm always shocked after shows when parents will walk up to me and show me like a 10-year-old who's like, who likes my work, or somebody, or a teenager who likes my work. Or I had a woman recently say she brought her two teenage kids to my stand-up show and they were both like, why I gotta do, and by then they really appreciated it. I'm not writing it for them, but I think what they're seeing is a person who is expressing empathy, especially with the younger generation. I do a lot of that. And also that when I talk about my kids, I don't talk about them as being less than me. I talk about us being in community together and how do we work through this together. And I also talk about times when my kids got one over on me, or things about that I respect about my kids and things that I'm in awe of about my kids. And sometimes I even bring my kids on stage with me. My 10-year-old will sometimes sit on the side of the stage and count how many times I curse. And so you're actually seeing a dad in action on stage and not just a comedian.
Yeah, yeah. I think kids can be such great teachers. I really think of, teens especially as mentors because they're growing up
Mhm.
in such a different world and such a different reality than we did. Which leads to my next question, which is, have you noticed a shift in the way that young people today are talking about and understanding race versus the way we as children or adolescents were talking and understanding race because of the shifts in just information technology, but also demographics and the world that we're living in?
Yeah, so I think that kids, just like adults do, have access to way more information than we had.
Mhm.
So I think it becomes really important as a parent to sort of be there to monitor what information your kids are taking in. And then you got to make decisions about what they're allowed to take in. Like, for example, yeah, I have three daughters. They all know what social media is. They all will watch an Instagram video if I send it, if they see it, but they don't have their own accounts. So by nature, that automatically limits their ability to like sort of just like go down the rabbit hole by themselves. Now, my oldest is 14. At some point, it starts to get pretty awkward if you're the one kid who doesn't have the social media account. So then it becomes about how do we negotiate that as me and her mom? And I'm also sympathetic to like, I don't want my kid to be the one kid who doesn't know what chocolate milk tastes like. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
don't that doesn't feel right to me. I always said to my wife, like my kids have never seen a Star Wars movie, but I want them to know what it is. So if it comes up in conversation, they're able to go, oh yeah, I know what that is.
Right,
I'm just not interested, which is
right,
fine.
right.
Um, so I think the shift is that in social media, and also the shift is that social media does a good job of turning adults into awful people. So therefore, it does an excellent job of turning kids and specifically boys into awful people. I think it does with women and girls. It turns them into damaged people oftentimes. But it really so they have to sort of navigate the universe of like people approaching them in ways that they wouldn't have done that when they were my when I was a kid because they wouldn't have had access to the information that would have turned them. You know what I mean?
And speaking of which, these portals, as you mentioned, especially with boys, and any boy who has a hobby can wind up on a portal
Yep.
toward like these overt displays of toxic masculinity or
Yep.
racism. And if that is the reality and that's the backdrop, what do you hope your work and work like yours can do as an antidote?
I mean, I think that's why it's important that, as I said earlier, that I'm as fervent and clear as I can be, because I'm not going to be louder than Andrew Tate necessarily, or I'm not going to have the platform of Joe Rogan, but I'm going to at least be as loud as I can be so that like so that I don't let the threat of like, well, if I say too much, I'm going to get in trouble. Then I'm silencing myself. So then my job is to also like, I feel like a big part of my job on social media is to be loud about what I believe and to constantly support and broadcast other people who are sharing opinions that I also believe. Opinions that have nothing to do with me sometimes about identities that I don't claim, but I'm like, oh, I didn't know this. I'm glad to know this now, and you should know this too. So for me, it becomes about like, this is why I have to be as loud and clear as I can be, because I don't know that I can be louder than the bad folks because the bad news spreads quicker, ugliness spreads quicker than beauty often. But I need to make sure that I'm trying to spread my particular version of petty beauty as effectively as I can.
And what's your message to parents who are trying to confront racism in our society?
So I mean, there's two different types of parents. There's the parents who are already doing the work, and there's the parents who think they don't need to do the work or have turned up. So we can split them up in by race if we want to. They generally split across racial lines. So to me, it's like if you're doing nothing, you're damaging. This is to me, it's you're damaging your child.
It's like what they say about you're either moving closer to God or away from God, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no sort of like there's no neutral perspective. I think there's no you're moving one way or the other way. Exactly. So for me, especially if you're a white parent, in the same way that my kids have an understanding about religions they are not related to, like we're like, this is Islam, this is Judaism, this is Christianity. Not that they have some deep PhD level knowledge, but I think it's important for you to have a cultural IQ that understands this. So that if we're walking down the street and we see a woman in hijab, that you know what that is.
Right.
And luckily we live in the Bay Area, so it's not like that. It's not going to be as strange to you by the eyes if a kid grows up somewhere else where they don't have where there's not as much diversity. So luckily we live in the Bay, so we're already starting ahead of the game. But it is of the utmost importance that you have these conversations, especially if your kid lives in a place where they're not seeing those people regularly in their world. I don't have to have as many conversations with my kids about the LGBTQ community because we live in the Bay Area and we see it. We see them, not it, and we're related to them, and they're in our house, and there's conversation. So my kids grew up with those are our aunts who are married and they have adopted black children. So all these conversations are just happening naturally. These two white women who are married and have adopted black children are in our house regularly for every holiday. So we don't have to sit them down and go, let me explain what gay is, or let me explain what adoption is. And we have that discussion, but it happens organically. You may live in a place where those people are not coming through your house, then you can't wait for them to happen organically. You have to be proactive.
Okay. I love it. W. Kamau Bell, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's Elise, and I, for one, remember those early days of pregnancy with all the decisions that you have to consider and how high stakes it felt to take care of my own body when I knew I was carrying another one. Many prenatal vitamins aren't even clinically tested. Plus, pregnant women, particularly those from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, are routinely excluded from clinical studies. And for these reasons, I would recommend Ritual's Essential for Women Prenatal. It's the #1 best-selling prenatal and the only leading prenatal backed by its own human clinical trial. And Ritual selects bioavailable key nutrients designed for optimal absorption. Moms taking Ritual reported their prenatal to be easier to swallow, gentler on the stomach, and a better overall positive experience than those taking a leading prenatal. Don't settle for less than evidence-based support. Get 25% off your first month at ritual.com/raisingus. Start Ritual or add Essential Prenatal to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/raisingus for 25% off. Let's be real. Starting these conversations isn't easy. How do you even begin? And how do you make it feel natural instead of awkward or overwhelming? That's exactly what Jelani Memory is here to help us figure out. As the founder of A Kids Co., his mission is to empower a generation of kids through diverse storytelling and to provide tips for families trying to talk about race in a way that can make an impact. Jelani, thanks for coming back on the show.
Of course, glad to be here.
Tell us how your own coming of age, your own family shaped your understanding of race and identity.
Yeah. So Grew up in the whitest big city in America, Portland, Oregon, as a black kid, often the only black kid in class, and race was always I was always aware of it.
Mm.
I was always aware that I was different. I'm the youngest of three siblings, and you know, our mom did the best she could by helping us understand how to navigate the world. But look, I remember experiencing racism as young as 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 years old, and it was sort of like the water that I swam in. And
Yeah.
so, as I began to get older and start to understand my experience a little better, and had kids of my own, I wanted to do better with them. I wanted to teach them more about what I experienced, but what they might experience themselves as well.
What kind of conversations did you have in your own family when you were a kid with your parents about what you were experiencing?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about it that much.
Mm.
And not to say it wasn't on the table, but look, my mom was raising us all by herself as a single mom, and us siblings, while we were all over in the sort of southwest area of Portland. And if you know Portland, it's a bit segregated. So most of black folks live in north or northeast, and we were over in southwest. Uh, and We didn't really talk about it that much. It was known, we were aware of it, but we weren't talking about it amongst each other.
So a lot of this led you on the trajectory where you wound up and why we're talking today, which is you wrote a kid's book about racism. For those who don't know the origin story, can you share that with us?
Yeah. So blended family. I've got 6 kids. Yes, that's a lot of kids. 4 white stepkids and 2 black biological kids. And I wanted to do better with them when it came to talking about race, culture, color, and racism. So I did what any good dad would do. I wrote a book for them. And it was only ever supposed to be for them. Printed one copy, and it was a way to both start and keep a conversation going that I thought would be really important. I wanted my kids always to feel comfortable to bring up the topic of racism with me. So wrote it, handed it to them, and the amazing conversations we had were incredible. And I realized they had such a high readiness to talk about it, and all of my fears of, will this be the right book? Will I've said the right things? Will I know what to say as they ask more questions? All of those things went out the door as I watched how they engaged with my own experience and my words in the book.
What do you feel like really engages kids so that you don't feel like, or we don't feel like as parents broadly, like we're having to give a lecture or that we're talking at our kids rather than with
Yeah.
them?
Honesty, always honesty. Kids can smell when we're telling them half truths, or we're brushing them off, or we're saving things for later, or even that discomfort that we show around certain topics. Kids really want us to be honest. Now, that doesn't mean we need to shock them or scar them. It really is about, how do we tell them the truth in a developmentally appropriate way and in a really thoughtful way. But that's what really engages kids, is just when we're just straight up with them.
How do you do it in a developmentally appropriate way? So talk us through what are examples of how you talk to your kids about race when they're in early elementary years versus say early middle school years?
So, look, every kid's different, but I find the best sort of measuring tool is, what kind of questions are your kids asking you?
Mm.
I think it is always appropriate to answer those questions that kids are asking. And kids will ask different questions as they grow up. And those are signals for them for what's developmentally appropriate. So I remember my son stunned me with a question when he was 7. He said, "Why does racism happen?" And I was like, I don't know if I've ever thought about why. I've thought about when, I've thought about who, I've thought about what kinds, but this sort of why, where does that come from? And so we had this really wonderful discussion about when people are different, and when people don't understand something, or when people believe the wrong ideas about something, they get led down a path of hate or mistreatment or abuse or racism. So, to me, it's really about listening to your kids and what kind of questions they're asking, and then being direct and honest about those answers back. And you'll find, and this is across the board, I've seen this again and again, is you are delivering answers maybe that seem too soon, but often are things that kids have already been thinking about. They've already been considering. They've already sort of built up a group of questions about. They're just waiting for you to engage with them on them.
What happens when we don't know the answers? Obviously, race and identity are topics that are so complex.
Yeah. I think it's important, again, to be honest and say, I don't know. Like, or gosh, I my parents didn't really talk to me about this when I was a kid, and so I don't know a lot about it, but let's go learn together. That can be a trip to the library, that can be a trip to Google, that can be a trip to ChatGPT. Like to me, it's actually about the journey, not necessarily the end and the result, and showing a willingness to journey with your kid and discover with them and to entertain their thoughts and questions so that it's not a one-time conversation about racism or discrimination, but it's an ongoing conversation that evolves as they grow up.
So, for parents who live in places where your kids aren't necessarily organically exposed to a lot
Yeah.
of difference, what can we do?
Mm. Part of me wants to push back because while I totally believe that there are spaces and places that are more diverse, right? Okay, East Coast, West Coast. What ends up happening is people self-segregate themselves into communities, into neighborhoods where they're not actually interacting with anybody who's different from them at all. And so I think the symptoms end up happening sort of everywhere. I think it's so important to seek out art, to seek out music, to seek out movies, to seek out stories, and to seek out spaces and places where people exist that aren't like you. And that can be across a multitude of spectrums. It doesn't just have to be race. And what I've nudged parents to do over time is to ask yourself, if everybody looks like you where you shop or where you live or where you go to the movies, why is that? Why why is it that you're never running into anybody who doesn't look like you? Is it that you're actually proactively avoiding those places, or are you subconsciously avoiding them because you feel uncomfortable being around them? And really, that's just a way to interrogate our own biases, our own prejudice, our own racism that sort of lives inside of us and not demonize it and go, oh gosh, this must mean I'm a bad person and I should just give up.
Yeah.
This is why when people say, I don't have a racist bone in my body, I go, I didn't know bones could be racist. Like, you know, it's okay, but you have to interrogate it and look at it and be aware of it, right? Instead of sort of staunchly denying it and then sort of closing off that part of yourself. So I think, look, the internet exists, right? There, those stories are out there, those ideas are out there, those books are out there. Seek them out and learn and be on a journey with your kids and look like find me a kid in the Midwest who's not on YouTube or TikTok,
Right.
who doesn't have big questions about these things, right? Go to the spaces and places that they are and look at what they're learning and seeing and go journey along with them.
You mentioned you are the father of 6. What do you feel are the main takeaways or fundamental understandings about race and identity and fairness that you want your kids to leave your house and launch out of, the memory home sort of knowing and embodying?
Mm, that's a tough one. I'd say I'd start with I want them to understand that even if it's not their experience, because I do have white kids, it does not mean that individuals do not experience it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So that's one thing. It's like racism is real, it exists, and it happens to both individuals and it is perpetrated by systems, and it has been since our country's founding and for long before that.
Yeah.
I think the second thing that I really want folks to know, or at least I want my kids to know, is that racism isn't just about not doing certain things, but really embracing the whole person and loving them and caring for them and understanding them and seeing them. This isn't just this is what led to color blindness, in my opinion.
Mm,
So trying to teach my kids not to be colorblind and go, "Oh, I don't see colors." Actually, no, see that person for who they are and value them as they are, which is really about understanding the richness of either if you are a black or brown person, which, for two of my kids, that is them. And so to see the richness and the fullness of their identity. But for my white kids is to see someone who doesn't look like them and not deny their identity, right? Which is its own form of racism, but embrace it as different from theirs, but has its own beauty and diversity and richness. And then if I'd give a last one, is that it's an ongoing conversation and a journey that they won't have it all figured out at any one stage of their life. I continue to learn and grow as I get older, and that's okay, and that they themselves, whether even if they're black or if they're white and have a black dad, doesn't mean they're immune from saying something racist or doing something racist. And it's okay to see that and acknowledge that and own that and make good on that, like make right on that and go, I'm sorry, or I shouldn't have said that, or wow, I didn't know, I wasn't supposed to put that like that. And just to be able to own that, as opposed to, again, that sort of offset phrase is like, oh, well, I couldn't be racist, or I don't have a racist bone in my body, right? It's like, actually, all of us have said and done things that can be harmful, especially when it comes to racism. It's okay to own those pieces.
And crucially, it's not just a personal way to look at things, right? Racism is systemic, it's part of systems. And so I think that's really important to remember. Jelani, looking ahead, what kind of world do you want kids to grow up in?
Mm. I want kids to grow up in a loving, empathetic, just, moral, right, righteous, good, safe world. And look, I believe like our children are trying to build that. Like they believe in that world. They want that world. In fact, they're ready to fight us grown-ups to make it happen. Like that's the world they want to build for themselves. So I love it.
What can we do as parents who are listening out there? What can we do to help make that happen? Get closer to a more just and righteous world?
I think the biggest part of what we can do, and like parents hear me on this, it's like listen to your kids. They are right about some stuff. Like kids will be the first one to call something out if it's homophobic, if it's racist, if it's ableist. Like they're the first ones to speak up in almost any context. That's true in my home, even. My kids are the first one to speak up. And I could say, oh, well, I'm older than you, or you don't know anything, or stay in your place. Or I can listen to them. I can really listen to what they're saying and what they care about and what they feel. And I think we've lost our way as parents when it comes to really truly valuing what our kids have to say.
Jelani Memory, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Jelani Memory and W. Kamau Bell for joining us. Just remember, every kid's experience with race is different, and figuring out who they are really varies too. And sometimes it comes with unexpected bumps along the way. That's why talking about race, keeping that dialogue open, isn't limited to one conversation. It can't be. They have to be ongoing. We need to make sure our children don't feel confused, worried, or like they're dealing with it all alone. And the more we know about the myths and misunderstandings around race, the better we can help kids understand what's really going on in a way that feels safe and supportive. For more tools and resources, be sure to visit us at akidsco.com. Thank you for listening. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your shows. Raising Us is sponsored by Nugget.